Behind me there, you see a large obelisk, which commemorates the Brazilian Civil War, a short but vicious conflict that took place in 1932, also known as the Paulista War. It was a conflict involving trenches, tanks, artillery and military aircraft. Who was fighting who and how did the conflict end is what you will learn today. Before 1930, there was the first Brazilian Republic, also known as the Old Republic or the Republic of the United States of Brazil. Brazilian politics was under oligarchic domination by the land gentries of São Paulo, dominated by the coffee industry, and Minas Gerais, dominated by the dairy industry. These politics are nicknamed milk and coffee politics or the coffee and cream oligarchy. In Portuguese, política do café com leite. Presidency passed back and forth between the factions of São Paulo and Minas Gerais. The demands of the working class and the poor for better living and working conditions were ignored. In 1920, the average worker in Brazil earned about 60 cents a day for 10 to 12 hours of work, 6 days a week. Women earned only 60% of what men were paid for the same job and suffered harassment and even physical beatings when they protested their conditions. The urban elites had it much better. Tensions were always there. A rebellion in southern Brazil occurred from 1912 to 1916, known as the Contestado War. 2/3 of the Brazilian army had to be brought in to put down the uprising. Thousands died in the process. In the cities there were more signs of unrest. In July 1922, a group of junior army officers called tenentes took over the Copacabana area of Rio de Janeiro. The reason for their resistance was the latest elected president, Arthur da Silva Bernardes, to take office. They denounced the planter oligarchy and called for an end of the electoral corruption. Despite valiant fighting, the uprising was crushed easily. Yet this inspired other movements to revolt. For example, in São Paulo. In 1924, this revolt was also crushed. The corrupt coffee and cream oligarchy came under severe pressure when, in the 1920s, the coffee prices went down, and this was made worse by the Great Depression that kicked off from 1929. Now the urban middle classes voiced their discontent. In 1930, there was a president from São Paulo, a Paulista. His name was Washington Luiz. Now, standard procedure was that he turned over power to the Minas Gerais faction. However, he did not. He chose another Paulista to succeed him. The newly formed Liberal Alliance that included the Minas Gerais group pitted against the Paulista planters that were known as the Conservatives. Their candidate was Julio Prestes. The Liberal Alliance candidate was Getúlio Vargas from Rio Grande do Sul. Prestes narrowly defeated Vargas in the following election. Yet Vargas and his supporters refused to accept the results, and they marched on Rio. He joined forces with the tenentes, and they toppled the old republic, installing a new one. The rule of the coffee and cream oligarchy had come to an end. Unlike the political transition from Portuguese colony to independent Brazilian empire in 1822 and from empire to republic in 1889, both of which were marked by social and economic continuity, the new regime installed in 1930 initiated significant economic and social change. Vargas set in motion centralization of power, and São Paulo was not happy with this. They were not going to sit idle and accept these political changes, and in 1932 they revolted against the central government. Real quick, people, conflicts like these won't get many views on YouTube. I love making videos about lesser known conflict, not always, World War II, but now here, conflicts in South America. If you want to support me, you can do so. You can do monthly via Patreon or a one-time donation via PayPal or via a super thanks. It's really easy. You can find the information below the video. The 1932 conflict goes by different names: the Constitutionalist Revolution, the Paulista War, or the Brazilian Civil War. In this conflict, the Constitutionalists, based in the Brazilian city of São Paulo, fought against the Loyalists, led by Getúlio Vargas. We must note that the Vargas group was very heterogeneous. There were professional politicians of the old state Republican parties. There were the tenentes, and also high-ranking officers of the Brazilian army. And they had different ideas of how to carry out their politics. And Vargas had to keep all these people together to stand strong against the Paulistas. And Vargas' other job was to find an answer to the Great Depression that was ravaging Brazil's economy. The composition of Vargas' first cabinet reflected the heterogeneity of the faction that had brought him to power. Outside opposition mostly manifested itself in Sao Paulo, that was now under military occupation by government forces. The elites of Sao Paulo, they were against Vargas' policies of centralization. They wanted to go back to constitutional rule and wanted their autonomy back. Hence they were called the Constitutionalists. Different factions within Sao Paulo began planning to overthrow Vargas. They looked for allies in other states, Minas Gerais, Rio Grande do Sul, but they wavered. Vargas promised elections in May 1933, but the Paulistas were everything but satisfied with this promise. Vargas was seen as devious, unscrupulous, and determined to prolong his revolutionary dictatorship as long as possible. He would surely find an excuse to postpone the promised elections. The Paulista elite and middle class, if not the population as a whole, were determined to resort to arms. The cause was just. Victory was certain. The war would be short and bloodless. Federal troops and state militia were united under the command of Isidoro Diaz Lopez. The states of Rio Grande do Sul, Minas Gerais, and Paraná would join. The idea was that they would together march on Rio and be joined by constitutionalist sympathizers along the way. Vargas would then resign or be deposed, and a five-man junta would be installed as the new government of Brazil. That was the plan. Or I'd rather say, the illusion. On July 9th, 1932, Paulista General Euclides Figueiredo declared himself in rebellion against the federal government. The constitutionalist forces in Sao Paulo numbered 40,000 to 50,000, the largest armed movement in Brazil thus far. However, they lacked sufficient experienced officers and initially armaments too. Voluntary popular mobilization was decreed, and the industries were adapted to produce weapons and ammunition. The support of the other states never materialized. There was only one general from Mato Grosso that came to their aid with only a few hundred troops, but the others remained loyal to Vargas. The political elites of Rio Grande do Sul and Minas Gerais were not willing to openly confront Vargas, despite their differences with him. In other states, minor rebellions and demonstrations occurred, but these were easily put down by government forces. And so, Sao Paulo was to face the government army alone. We are talking about 60,000 better trained and better equipped troops, as well as state militias with tens of thousands of militias in reserve. The so-called Constitutionalist Revolution was born defeated. In the ensuing fighting, which lasted 85 days, there was heavy artillery, mass infantry charges on entrenched positions, and for the first time in Brazil, aerial bombardments. Initially, the primary battleground lay in the eastern Paraíba Valley leading towards Rio de Janeiro, then the capital of Brazil. The 2nd Division staged a rebellion pushing towards Rio de Janeiro, but encountered staunch resistance from the 1st Loyal Division, commanded by General Goiás Monteiro, positioned at the border of the Rio de Janeiro and São Paulo states. According to the Brazilian Army's Chief of Staff, initially opposed deploying the 1st Division in the valley, suspecting their allegiance to the rebels. The 1st Division was deployed just in time to halt the Paulista advance. In the Paraíba region, Monteiro established the East Detachment, comprising approximately 34,000 troops, facing off against around 20,000 Paulistas. Despite 3 months of trench warfare and covering some 70 kilometers, government forces remained about 150 kilometers away from Sao Paulo when the conflict came to an end. In southern Sao Paulo, government forces formed the Southern Detachment, consisting of Federal 3rd and the 5th Division, 3 cavalry divisions, and a Gaucho brigade from Rio Grande do Sul, totaling 18,000 soldiers against a mere 3,000 to 5,000 Paulistas. The federal forces breached the rebel defensive line at Itararé on July 17th. marking the most significant advance in the conflict. However, they remained considerably distant from São Paulo when hostilities ceased. The defensive front emerged in the Minas Gerais region, active only after August 2nd. The 4th Federal Division, stationed in Minas Gerais, along with local police and troops from other states, penetrated the rebel defenses at Eleutério, a district of Itapira, on August 26th, advancing approximately 50 kilometers towards Campinas, bolstering by 18,000 soldiers against roughly 7,000 Paulistas. The 4th Division found itself merely 70 kilometers away from São Paulo. Despite not reaching São Paulo on the 2nd of October 1932, the Constitutionalists, they surrendered. Casualties, both military and civilian, on both sides ranges from 3,000 to 15,000, although the latter number is most likely an exaggeration. After 2 defeats in a row in 1930 and once again in 1932, São Paulo found itself once else under military occupation by government forces. The leaders of the Paulistas were arrested or exiled to Uruguay or Argentina. The 1932 Civil War provided him, Vargas, with a unique opportunity to reshape the political forces in each state by strengthening the state political machines in the hands of federal inventors and facilitating the creation of new pro-government state parties to contest the 1933 elections and any future congressional and state elections. Despite strengthening his power, Vargas would deal with more revolts in the 1930s. In 1935, a communist revolt broke out, and in 1938 a fascist one, done by the so-called integralists. Vargas would set up his third Brazilian republic, known as the Estado Novo, and that was the Brazilian state during the Second World War. Thanks to my patrons, you see their names on the screen, and a special thanks to Rainy Bachtel, Thomas Sabiega, Damian Wallace, Connor, Marcus Gass, Nick Terranova, Mark Littlehill, Justin Trebell, Tanya Dixie, Susanna Di Bella, Fabrizio, Robert Meehan, David H. Ovett, Wayback History, Michael Prusi, Daniel Holland, and Marcus Fielding. If you want to learn more on South American history, click here. Thanks for watching. Greetings from Sao Paulo, Brazil.